Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my first impressions on Netflix Avatar episode 5 and 6. So this is Spirited Away and Masks. In general, once again, I enjoyed both of the episodes. I would definitely say episode 6 is better to episode 5. I think episode 5 has some very interesting things. It's just, in a way, structure-wise, adaptation-wise, did they make the right choices changing as much as they did, bringing up as much stuff as they did? It's an interestingly constructed episode in that, obviously, you are taking effectively a two-parter that's effectively present in ATLA 107, 108, and you are taking away quite a bit of the Roku importance. They give him something else, which we'll discuss, of course, if that is a great decision or not. But then they have the 107, like, Heibai stuff, you know, kind of continue into the following episode, in that Aang has to go to get information about Roku, because Roku knows information about Ko, to then go back to resolve what was there in the first place. And in the meantime, this is where the Blue Spirit happens. So it's, again, I think a pretty decent attempt to compress a bunch of episodes together. There are interesting ideas that work, but there are also problems that come with that. And I think this is where this was probably to be expected, that this middle section of the show is, you have 4 episodes to basically cover, like, what, 14 episodes or something like that, and you can't cover all of them. And so their attempt to put as many of these elements in as possible creates pros and cons, basically. So, episode 5, Spirited Away. It was pretty accurate up until I felt like the Heibai stuff just almost disappeared. This is where, absolutely, it's my first impression. I would need to watch the episode a second time, because I watched episode 5 last night and episode 6 this morning, so I definitely would need to go back to see episode 5 again. But I did feel that, like, they did a little bit of the episode 4 end of the Omashu arc style thing with Heibai, of just like, okay, acorn gets planted in the ground, and the main issue here is Ko? And, like, I'm a little bit confused about, like, wait, were the two spirits, was it a coincidence? Like, was Heibai the one who took them in, or was it always Ko? And do we actually come back to Heibai in the right way? Or were they just kind of doing a little bit of a reference with Heibai, because that was the thing to do? So maybe Heibai didn't maybe get the treatment he quite needed. We'll see again when they go into the finale, if they come back to Ko and Heibai and stuff like that, how much Spirit World stuff we get there, because we have to get a Karuk scene, of course. But then, as expected, and I think for the better, they made the right choice, and that was to make the Spirit World dynamics of this episode more representative of what the series how the series uses the Spirit World as it goes forward. So this episode in the original was always a bit confusing, especially in reflection and where they went with things, because Aang's spirit is separated from his body, but he's still in the physical world, and Heibai brings people to the Spirit World. Sokka goes to the Spirit World, but Aang doesn't in the episode, and it's a little bit like, huh? This is such a weird way to debut some of this stuff, where Heibai is the only spirit that we see. Whereas this one, I was like, okay, here's the blue spirits, but then from there they go into the Spirit World. You actually see the transition over from, like, their blue spirits in the physical world, and then when they transfer over, they're still spirits, but they're in the Spirit World, so they don't look like spirits there. And I'm like, yes, details are correct. So we got the gang. We got Sokka, Katara, and Aang in the Spirit World. Now, they switched things up a little bit here in a kind of interesting way, where they basically went with the idea that Sokka and Katara, because they were sort of sucked into the Spirit World, basically, more so than, like, they did it out of their own raw spirituality, they can't interact as much with the spirit world as Aang can. So we got a Wan Shi Tong scene out of nowhere. And Aang can speak to Wan Shi Tong, but Wan Shi Tong can basically choose, I was unclear if it was like Wan Shi Tong chooses to not have them hear him, or just they're not spiritual enough to perceive him in whatever way. But then it was clear that other spirits could just like make themselves known and appear. So I'm guessing this was just Wan Shi Tong being his usual kind of arrogant self. But interestingly, did he say his full name? He definitely called himself the knowledge spirit, but it's clearly Wan Shi Tong, just randomly out here in the middle of the spirit world, the spirit library not referenced yet anyway. Will be interesting to see if they tackle the whole library situation with Zhao. Because I almost got myself confused with timelines and stuff like that watching the episode. I think of my reaction reflecting back on it now. I'm like, oh yeah, the library's not here. But then I remember, oh yeah, the library's in the desert. The library's in the physical world, of course. So Wan Shi Tong being on his own away from the library in the spirit world actually makes sense. So if you see my reaction to the episode, you might notice that kind of little error there. But anyway, that was kind of interesting. But then they incorporate the Fog of Lost Souls in, and this is how they basically do the separation of the characters, and it becomes this weird thing where they kind of almost drop aspects of its 107. They do the acorn cycle of life, the forest will come back aspect. But then it kind of becomes like elements of the swamp, with the idea of the characters are separated and have their own sort of like spiritual kind of little arc. And they expand on it quite heavily in that Katara just has the whole Southern Raiders flashback happen here. And it's something you can do in hindsight, but I'm like, that's such an important episode for Katara, the Southern Raiders, and I've always liked that in a way they've held back the details of that until then. And is this a little bit of a case of like, you know, you have too much knowledge almost, and you feel you have to bring everything forward, and it's kind of getting to the point where I'm looking at book 2 and almost a little bit of elements of book 3, and it's like, are you taking too much out of the later seasons to fill in here? And I'm worried, like, are you going to encounter maybe some issues when you maybe come to do the adaptation, where you've already done quite a few of these episodes effectively? Like, it was nicely done in terms of the emotion of the sequence, and like, but like, you're already revealing Yan-Ra here, and we're gonna take some time to get around to maybe doing that arc. So it interesting, just in terms of like, you just wonder, like, was this the right time to do that? It's certainly an interesting one to use this time to present more of the character's backstory. Like, I think that's a reasonable thing to maybe attempt to do, of like, hey, let's actually present a bunch of the characters' backstories over the course of basically episode 5 and 6, the whole cast effectively. And so that was cool. Like, we got to see Kya, we saw the whole sequence, we saw the whole idea they're searching for the last Southern Waterbender. Kya says it's her. They added a few extra little sequences to it where Katara actually tries to waterbend, and so Yan-Ra actually sees waterbending happening, and so kind of knows it's happening here. In a way, this proves it to him in the moment. And you actually see a little bit of the attack. Like, again, this is kind of where they're going with the age rating, where they're never going quite into like gore or anything like that, but where the show would immediately cut and you'd maybe see a flash and an implication. This show shows Kya basically being like set on fire effectively, and then we immediately cut away, and it makes it obviously pretty impactful. But it's not to say that the original didn't do it well as well, because that's the error some people can go down of, like, dark equals better, that by showing it much more clearly it is more impactful, when no, the original still works just as well. This was just a slightly different way to do it. It's just, is the timing right for it? Definitely. Sokka had a very interesting scene here. The whole setup to this, actually, I thought was quite interesting, because he met a fox spirit. It was like a three-tailed fox thing going on here, that had such a peppy voice. I thought it was actually a pretty fun scene, just seeing Sokka like, huh? What's going on here? Sokka asking sort of the right questions of like, basically, is that a frog or is that a spirit frog and stuff like that. But yeah, this fox spirit, it was like, is this meant to be like related to Wan Shi Tong? Is this what the knowledge seekers look like? Or is this some sort of a different thing going on here? Because especially the colors didn't really seem to match up. And then, because it was clearly a fox, I think the captions as I was watching the episode said fox. So because I was maybe thinking, because they get to Mother of Faces references, was this meant to be like the spirit wolf? But it looked obviously quite different than that. So I don't know. That was an interesting little one there, just to give Sokka that interaction. And then we go into his kind of Fog of Lost Souls truth moment. And it's just like, everyone loves the Fog of Lost Souls. It's such an interesting writing device because it has a character tackle a deep truth within themselves, of course, which is always interesting to do with characters. So Sokka gets this backstory of basically, they highlight that basically Bato of the Water Tribe effectively happened in Sokka's past. He had already had the ice dodging trial happen, and he did it with Bato, but it seems like Sokka basically failed it, and it was Bato who kind of like bailed him out of it. And this is where they're going into the Sokka's not as capable as we think he is kind of arc, where he gets the Mark of the Wise, but then afterwards he overhears Bato and Hakoda talking, and Hakoda very heavily criticizes Sokka. And Sokka is really upset about what happens here. Bato defends him with the idea of like, what actually happened is like, it went wrong very quickly, very suddenly. Like, I barely saved the situation. So it was borderline impossible for him in training to have done it, but Hakoda doesn't want the excuses. I just thought it was like, as like the basically introduction scene for Hakoda, that was a bit overly harsh. And I think they've done that a few times here with just characters being a little bit too aggressive, like that they can't get across like a subtlety, a nuance of an emotion, that they have to be like quite intense about it. Whereas I think you could have got this across in a way where like it's more of a slight worry for Hakoda rather than like, what does Hakoda say? Like, he's like he nearly ruined us, he nearly wrecked us, or something like that. Like that Sokka messed up so badly, he nearly killed everyone type situation. And because they've taken out other subtleties of the rest of Sokka's arc, this just feels like, whoa, this would have fit, I think, if this version of Sokka was notably like more like the original, where like he really kind of struggles to get up to the level where he can take down firebenders and stuff like that on his own. But I feel like the level of competence of this version of Sokka has been at a bit of a higher level, and I'm just slightly worried that we have not maybe found the arc for Sokka yet, even though they've attempted to do a little bits and pieces here and there. Because Ian is really good as Sokka. It's just, I think they've taken out some of the important things that you need for the character arc. And while this is an interesting scene and an interesting adaptation choice, to like have Bato be here, have this scene not take place in the present but in the past, it's just an interesting choice of like, maybe they should have tried to maybe do a nice dodging sequence at some point, but it's too much of that would have been a bit too much of a side plot. And the whole point here is we're being more serialized, but it's so clear that this is the adaptation's struggle, that it only has 8 episodes to try and cover a lot of different individual episodes. And while it has the time to do a lot, they were never going to do a thing where like an episode just consists of like 4 or 5 different episodes and massive cuts happening all over the place. They're trying to make it a smoother process, but in that process you make other things rougher, basically, is the way I'm kind of seeing it. Then Aang's kind of separation spirit world kind of thing is that because he is at ease to a certain degree in the spirit world, he has a more positive situation happen here, because basically the fog doesn't really work on him because he is at ease in this. He has an interaction with Gyatso where they explain that Gyatso has basically been able to temporarily delay, like, passing on, and I suppose the reincarnation cycle continuing. He is able to sort of delay his full-on moving on. And he was able to stay here and wait for Aang to have this conversation with him. And obviously, they basically say as much at the end of the first episode, but they confirm it in episode 6 that he was only able to kind of stay here for Aang one time. So they're kind of confirming that the way this happened was not that Gyatso was able to, like, meditate out of his body, go into the spirit world before he died, but just that he was able to do something enough to allow his sort of spirit to linger for a little bit longer. This is where I do wish the scene with Sozin back in the flashback was maybe a little bit clearer about, like, him only defending to create the time to put himself in that kind of meditative state, to make it clear that he's kind of doing the Obi-Wan Darth Vader type situation of, like, I'm making the choice where as I die I'll become more powerful type situation. But that would, and even though, like, there's some weirdness around, like, hand wavy, like, how did they exactly accomplish this, whereas, like, to me there was a very clear path to do it, but they chose not to take it. This was a bit like, okay, now we've opened the door to characters who die can have their spirit linger on. For Gyatso, you kind of get it, because he's someone who you would say is spiritual enough to where, you know, he could probably do that. He is a character who you would put in the probably the category of characters who would potentially know how to choose to do basically what Iroh did, and become a spirit after death. But the scene I thought was great and very, very emotional, because they've kind of placed a little bit of extra importance on sort of Gyatso's advice to Aang, kind of echoing into the present. Him getting this final scene with Gyatso was actually really, really impactful. And obviously building up to the big moment of basically saying, you know, if you were here, you wouldn't have helped. You wouldn't have won the day. You would have died like anyone else. So don't blame yourself for what happened. What happened ended up being good, because now there's actually hope for the world, and you can, you know, do what you need to do on your own, and that you have basically accepted the role of the Avatar now. You're on the right path. Now is what you need to do. But then there's also the plot element of this, which is that him pointing out that, oh yeah, like, Ko is the spirit you're dealing with here, predatory spirit. You need to figure out kind of how to deal with this. That Ko has had entanglements with various avatars over the years, including Roku. Kind of, it gets brought up here. Roku was an avatar who actually managed to, like, what they basically say, like, he bested, like, Ko in some way at one point, but the wording is such that, like, I don't really mean that he defeated him in combat or anything like that, but that he managed to get one over on Ko. And so, okay, that's a new angle. That's going to be what we go into the second episode to try and actually fix. I suppose, speaking of which, Ko, the way they did it was kind of interesting, that, like, he obviously captures everyone, holds on to them for a certain period of time, and then sort of, like, feeds off them. And we've got this vague idea that there are spirits like this, Glowworm and Ko, and the idea of them feeding off people in the spirit world is how they kind of gain power, and especially for Ko, it's kind of how he gains faces as well. So kind of pretty dark one, but I definitely would have to go back to the episode to see when they really did the whole transition point between Heibai and Ko, because it did feel like there was this weird sense of, like, whoa, is this a three-spirit operation? Are the Fog of Lost Souls, Ko, and Heibai all working together here? But I'm probably misremembering when they maybe resolved Heibai, but I don't obviously remember them showing a big change. They did the acorn bit, but I forget if they really resolved it. Because again, even in episode 6, it was a really quick resolution, much like episode 4 in the Omashu arc. They just, we're done, we're moving on. So there's that. And in the background, we of course have Zhao get promoted. He gets the Yuyan archers because we're setting up the Blue Spirit episode. And all the time I'm thinking like, wait, how are they doing 108 in this? And I get how we're getting to like Roku, but how is some of this happening here? Where are all the characters going and stuff like this? But they did it interestingly well. So transitioning over to episode 6, I suppose. Masks. This is where they did Zuko's backstory. So they chose to do the Storm effectively here alongside Blue Spirit. So this was the correct choice. This definitely worked because they did the Iroh G stuff, but they did it on the ship with Zuko away, and they did a little bit at the start, but Zuko was never quite getting into the "I'm challenging you to an Agni Kai" bit, but they did enough of it to get it across. And I in general liked a lot of what they did here, because there was nice extra like additions in terms of like Iroh being a bit more involved in say just like having a few scenes of Iroh actually speaking to his brother, and that in a way Iroh is kind of one of the only people able to like speak up to Ozai, which I thought was so interesting in a lot of those scenes. Ozai would like be like, okay, you said that, but I disagree with you, and like I'm dismissing you. But it's not like Iroh's getting punished for speaking out of turn in the same way that anyone else would be. And I thought that was actually an interesting angle, that like he's the only one that Ozai won't like fully like rebuke in the same way he would do anyone else. Ozai and Iroh. So that was quite interesting. They did, of course, the whole scene of the War Council meeting, Zuko speaking out against the plan to sacrifice the troops. And then it's probably one of the best adaptation kind of changes or just kind of evolutions kind of reveals, was the whole idea of tying the origin of like Zuko's crew into what he got banished for, of like he defended basically the 41st Division, who were going to be sacrificed. They were new recruits. And Ozai, in a way out of sort of spite of just like these weakling troops, you're a weakling, they'll be your crew on your banishment mission. You get the 41st. And Iroh revealing that to G, that is the entire story of like, you don't realize it, but Zuko basically got his scar because he protected this crew. And it's a super cool connection, and I love the extra show of respect from the crew. Like, this is how he truly gains their actual loyalty, and why they give him the sort of guard of honor at the end of the episode when he comes back. Kind of highlighting the compassion like theme that they had throughout this episode. That has always been that idea of the character of like, if he was Fire Lord, things would have gone differently, because he kind of was avoiding being overly affected by basically in a way like the curse of the royal family that kind of really starts from like heading into kind of the Sozin era, kind of going forward, of just the competitive nature trying to push you to these insane limits to fight against your siblings. That is clearly deeply affected like Ozai to try and get on top over Iroh. Ozai is doing it to basically forge Azula into what she's going to do. That's kind of clearly been the arc we're going for there, and it's obviously implied to have happened in the past before. But you know, the idea of Zuko's compassion here is something different, and I like the little addition of like Iroh and Ozai visiting him when he's like recovering, and Zuko still almost the idea that like Ozai only banishes him because even after the injury and all this sort of stuff, he still is like, the weak can get stronger. It's still the compassion, the hopeful idea, and this is where you really see like, this is who Ozai is. This idea of like, in a way, positivity, caring about other people. He doesn't get it at all. And this is why Zuko is actually more suited to be a good and strong leader and all of that stuff. And this is, again, it's because it's accurate to the source material while doing, I think, nice and I think stuff that makes sense, additional scenes to add in here, because they gave it the time because they were aware of just how important it was. And it's maybe like, are they treating some of the other changes and swapping around of locations with as much care and attention? And that's just an interesting kind of thing here, because I think most people are agreeing with the idea that episode 1 and 6 are among the best episodes, and they're the ones that, in a weird turn of events, where Mike and Brian still have writing credits on episodes. And in a way, they're also some of the episodes where they are most grounded to a certain degree to the original, while still having maybe changes done in more of the right direction. But we don't really know what to make of that. I don't want to make too much of a point out of that, but I just think it is interesting that there's been a pretty consistent thing that I've seen across, like 1 and 6 being regarded quite well. But anyway, we'll move on. Aang going to the temple. They're obviously lightning quick in terms of Aang needs to go there. Oh, here he is arriving. Hops in the door and is just like, sages, I'm the Avatar, this should go great. And then they they firebend after him. And seconds later, here's Shayu. Seconds later, here we are. The whole sequence is done. And it's like, okay, that was rushed, but you accomplished what you needed to do. It's like, okay, I just have that acceptance that, like, I would have preferred a little bit of a time to breathe here, because it's a kind of important build up and sequence, but that's what we have to do. And then they were kind of unclear about, like, did Shayu get killed by the sages and then June and Nyla came in, or did the firebender fight not really start and everyone just got taken out by June and Nyla? And that's another one of the changes that happens, of course. But yeah, Aang just get to speak to Roku. And I liked the characterization of Roku, because it was a complete contrast to Kyoshi. And I liked that there were even jokes about that this was clearly part of the intent, that Kyoshi would be this very focused, fighting justice above all else. You just need to do stuff. That's what it's about. And then Roku comes in initially, like, acting like Kyoshi a little bit, but then he immediately starts joking, and it shows the kind of contrast, and he's more emphasizing the diplomacy side of being the Avatar, that you need to be a good diplomat as well, that you can solve issues without fighting, but sometimes when diplomacy fails, it can maybe create some of the worst conflicts that are possible. And of course, he reflects on the idea of, they don't say it as much. This was interesting. They didn't really bring up Roku Sozin. They also didn't bring up Roku Gyatso, which I thought was kind of interesting. That, like, well, it makes sense potentially why Gyatso would maybe know Roku had a run-in with Ko, but they don't actually make that connection yet, which, it's like, clear-cut idea to do it, but why didn't you? It was a bit interesting there. But anyway, he gets that idea across of, like, there's that clear implication of, when he mentions the idea of sometimes friendships can kind of cause issues. I'm not sure it was worded in exactly the best way possible. I'd have to look at it again. I took the meaning that I think I was meant to take from it, which was that it was basically referencing the idea of my friendship with Sozin kind of ended up starting the war, and in a way it got in the way. That Roku is always the most critical of himself for making that choice, and in a way having the war happen because of that. And that's why he has that almost like negative view on don't let friendships kind of get in the way of what you need to do as the Avatar. Whereas the actual takeaway is that, no, Roku, you actually made the right choice. It's unfortunate, very unfortunate what happened, but you being compassionate in that moment is not wrong, is definitely the takeaway. And especially if you've read the Promise comic, you know that is the takeaway. And then, yeah, we get into the reveal of, like, what was the whole Roku Ko situation. So he says, I didn't defeat Ko. He's basically kind of almost like, to a certain degree, too powerful to a degree for that. But I basically got the advantage over him by taking something from him. And this is why the Avatar has a bit of a bargaining chip against Ko, is that I took this, what do they call it? They called it like a totem that represents the Mother of Faces. And we get some of the details here about like how she is the origin of kind of identity and unique faces in the world. And this is obviously a connection between the face stealer and then effectively the face creator. And there's obviously a issue here between mother and son. And so stuff that relates to his mother is the only way to really get through to Ko and put him on edge effectively. And so this is the way to kind of resolve this. If you do what he sort of says, give back what you took from me, this totem of the Mother of Faces, that will resolve the conflict. And they do that. In the Roku Shrine, they basically have a whole thing of Avatar relics. I would need to screenshot through it. I didn't get, because I was doing a reaction, I didn't pause it or anything like that. So I just noted a few little details there. I think there was a knife there. It might have been Karuk's knife, or depending on what they're doing with that. We might be coming back here, because I think we see Katara and Sokka and Appa arriving at Crescent Island. So I think we're going to go back there in the coming episodes, but we'll see how that exactly goes. But yeah, he takes the little wooden totem thing with him. A little bit of confusion over like, wait. Is that a physical object or a spiritual object? Because of course this is where the spirit mechanics get a bit weird. Where Aang has it, it's clearly in a physical shrine. He has it with him, he brings it to another place. He then meditates into the physical world, and apparently can bring this physical object with him, which Ko then takes. The only thing that sort of makes sense with this is that the implication is that it's a spiritual object in the first place. And there is a weird kind of connection, of course, between physical and spirit world stuff. And I guess the whole winter solstice aspect kind of comes into play here as well. It was resolved very quickly, I would say. Again, the resolution happened very suddenly, where like we just montage through. Aang meditates in, he leaves it, backs away, Ko takes it, and everything kind of resolves itself. We fix everything in Senlin, Aang is reunited with Katara and everyone else, and we're done. So I would say in the same way that I felt like some of the stuff, like say Jet, I almost like forget the exact like, wait, that was Jet's last scene? Wait, that's the Mechanist last scene? Like, do we actually resolve these things? I felt a similar way here, where it was like, and we're done, move on. It was so sudden. They just didn't allow you that final moment to breathe and acknowledge that, like, hey, it was important that we met these characters. It was important that this arc happened. Instead, it was very much just, wrap it up, we're going home. But yeah, the gap in the middle, obviously, is that June captures... There's a whole sequence of that actually happens. So June captures Aang at the Fire Temple. You know, obviously there's a bit of a weird thing about, like, there's an island, she's on Nyla. She obviously took a boat over, I'm guessing. So there's just some logistics there that maybe need to be solved. She then has Aang in a cave. She actually has a little bit of a dialogue with Aang, just highlighting that her thing is, like, she's fine with the way things are. She doesn't feel like anything needs to change one way or the other. She's just gonna go with the flow and see what happens. She obviously fulfills her mission to Iroh and Zuko, and then when they're transporting Aang, this is where Zhao comes back into the story. He's an admiral now. He goes over the top of them, takes Aang, and we set up the Blue Spirit plot here. This is why Zuko knows where Aang is and has to infiltrate to get him out, so that he still has the ability to, you know, bring Aang back to Ozai. And so they did the Blue Spirit basically entirely accurately, like borderline shot for shot accurate. Like they did it all here exactly. Azula was not a Yu-Yan archer here, but we did have the Yu-Yan archers introduced by name, and otherwise we did everything. Action sequence, they work together. Zuko holds Aang hostage to get them out. The Yu-Yan archers take out Zuko. Aang saves Zuko, but we do get an extended scene of Aang and Zuko talking, which is where obviously, like, I think in a way, like, the idea here is it good that they had this big conversation to basically get across the same idea, that one or two lines of dialogue that we saw in the original actually happened? Is less is more the idea here or not? I feel that you maybe didn't need as much dialogue between them, given what you actually ended up getting across. And there's a strength in the writing of like how they were confident enough to let them only have some minor dialogue back and forth in the original, and that they obviously felt they needed to have more happen here. I appreciated it because you at least had some light moments of like, oh, Aang gets to reference just normal life, like training to write, and Zuko training to write, and how he really likes Zuko's penmanship, and that he apologizes to Zuko for taking the notebook, but the notebook has really helped him because he hasn't had anyone to help him learn about the Avatar, but this has been super helpful inadvertently. And we do eventually build to the whole idea of like, if in another time, if things were different, maybe we could have been friends, because I used to have friends in the Fire Nation, and I think and just that sense of there's clearly something different about you, that you are different than everyone else, because obviously you fought against the Fire Nation to try and get me back, and basically knows about the banishment now. So you get that interesting idea of like they've had a connection. Aang knows Zuko is not just the same as every other Fire Nation person, so it got that whole idea across, I think, pretty well overall. So to me, both of these episodes, I think, were very interesting kind of exercises in terms of addressing kind of changes. I do feel episode 6 did it better overall. I felt the changes were more subtle and they added more to the story, versus I do feel the episode 5 felt just a little bit like they almost took too much. Like Katara's whole Southern Raiders backstory just presented here out of the context of that episode. It's certainly a way to do it, but like I also like the restraint that there is about like something like that scene in the swamp, of just the hope of it being referenced like a little bit, and you're wondering like the exact details of what happened. The Sokka scene was like interesting, but it felt very separate almost, and almost like it doesn't really work that well with the rest of the stuff. Obviously for Katara and Sokka, we've got the Water Tribe arc coming up where they have stuff going on, and I'm intrigued to see if they get the attention that they probably do actually need, because it's been very Aang focused the last little bit, and maybe Katara and Sokka didn't get as much as they maybe needed in the Omashu arc, so they kind of do need a little bit of attention here going into the final episode, and that's purely a thing with the adaptation and it needing to crush a lot into one. That if you had 14 episodes, inevitably there's going to be a Sokka focused episode, there's going to be a Katara focused episode, whereas here you have to get a portion of one of these episodes, and because they're all mixed up and in different orders, they maybe don't work the way that they initially did, and so definitely some of the characters need kind of a little bit more than others. But I think Aang and Zuko have been done pretty well so far. I hope they get the Sokka and Katara arcs right in going into the finale here. But yeah, I'm pretty much going to just wrap it up there. So they're my initial impressions on episode 5 and 6 of Netflix Avatar. Later on today, you'll see my thoughts on episodes 7 and 8. I'm going to pretty much watch them immediately after I upload this video. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.